Today I'm going to talk about one of the top 100 weapons of mankind. And incredibly today in Ireland, some parents allow their children as young as 2, 3 or 4 to use it. It is the stirrup. Some military historians made a list of the 100 top weapons of mankind. And at the top of the list were the obvious things such as the atom bomb and the machine gun. But further down the list was the stirrup. And it appears that at least 2 European nations never got that memo. They were the Romans and the Irish. At its basic level, the role of a military horse is as a force multiplier. And that asks the question, what is a force multiplier?
If you take an infantryman at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, he could fire 3 to 4 shots per minute from a musket. 100 years later, a soldier with a machine gun could fire approximately 500 rounds per minute. So the rate of fire from one World War I soldier was equivalent to 150 Napoleonic soldiers. That is the force multiplying effect.
So the same principle applies to the mounted warrior. Now, some people say that a horse can be upwards of 20 times more powerful than a man, others 40 times more powerful than a man. It really comes down to the size of the horse in question. But what is understood is that the power of a horse cannot be fully utilised without the use of a stirrup.
Take for example this image of a Norman knight striking down an Anglo-Saxon from the Bayeux Tapestry. You can see how far he is delivering his blow, emphasising the force of the cut. The Anglo-Saxon is beaten to the ground. If the knight couldn't counteract this movement by pressing hard into his stirrup, he would simply fall from his horse. On the use of the stirrup, one historian makes the following comment. In the east, a new and awesome threat was emerging. This was the Hun invasion. The Huns, who came from far distant Asia, were to set their mark on the pattern of European warfare for the next 1,000 years. Their speed and mobility made them seem invulnerable. What made the Huns the most devastating form of cavalry the world had yet seen was not their speed, endurance or ruthlessness, but the fact that they also had saddles and stirrups. These were some of the tribes the Romans described as barbarians that threatened the Roman Empire. Rome would fall to the Visigoths in the year 410 AD. But Roman cavalry would not adopt the stirrup until around 600 AD. If we look again at the Norman knights at Hastings, the majority of knights are literally standing in their stirrups as they hurl their spears. The stirrup would become even more important when the primary use of the lance would be used in the couched position. That is to say, couched under the arm, usually carried 30 degrees off the body. Now man, horse and weapon were simply one projectile. When the lance struck, the knight was able to absorb the force through his stirrups. Through the Middle Ages, many of the images of knights can be seen using this riding style, with their legs thrust forward. In fact, this seat is still used today by many jockeys who ride over fences. They push their legs forward in the event of the horse hitting the fence. It gives them some chance of staying in the saddle. This seat was adopted from the old fox hunting seat that was used for similar effect when jumping solid objects. However, in Ireland at the time of the Norman conquests, Irish warriors rode without a saddle. They preferred to ride with a basic cushion on the horse's back held with a type of belt, today called a surcingle. From the History of Ireland written by Thomas Wright comes the following passage of King John meeting an Irish king. There was a king of Connaught, Cathal the Red-Handed O'Connor, whom our narrator describes as one of the richest kings in Ireland. He came to do his service with a large army. Cathal himself was poorly mounted and attired in the same style as his subjects. King John immediately presented him with a courser, richly saddled and bridled, which the king of Connaught received with thanks, and then, taking the saddle off, mounted on it bare, for he did not know how to ride with a saddle. And thus he rode a long way by the side of King John, who, along with his Norman courtiers, was much entertained by his appearance.
Of course, the best the Irish could hope for was to harass the Norman cavalry formations. To have gone up against them head to head would have been suicidal. And of course the Irish were mounted on much smaller horses, not much bigger than ponies. And the Normans had the destrier, the war horse. But contrary to popular belief, these horses too weren't that big either. And that's a story for another video. The difference was the way the Normans handled and used their horses, in part through the use of their stirrups.
If fighting from horseback, the Irish warriors used their spears in a downward or pig-sticking motion as opposed to the more deadly couched lance used by the Normans. This mode of riding was used for many centuries and is depicted as late as the 1580s in this depiction of Irish horsemen being pursued by the English. There does not seem to be any logic or reason as to why the Irish never adopted the stirrup. Perhaps it was simply not their custom. Many references have been made to the fact that Irish foot soldiers, such as Cairns and Gallowglass, went barefoot into battle, preferring their own natural grip on the ground. Perhaps in a similar way, the Irish saw the stirrup as an encumbrance to their riding. By the 1600s, the Irish would adopt the stirrup for their horses, in part due to the oppression by the English Tudors of the old Gaelic ways, and enforced this by the power of the sword and the stirrup.